on my phone.
Oh.
I know. Hold on. Let me turn into the passage of Scripture.
Let me go ahead and get the projector set up.
We need a projector, exactly. Get my PowerPoint going here.
Amen.
All right. We're in the book of Exodus. Now, last week we went over a introduction to the book of Exodus. You learned a few things, I hope. And so now we're going to start telling the story of the book of Exodus. Amen. And today we'll just get an introduction into the life of Moses. And I hope it'll be a help to you. How you guys doing with this time change, by the way? Everybody doing okay? Kind of messed up your sleep patterns, waking up at a weird time? No. Okay, all right. Some of you are like, we're right on. The rest of us are like, oh, man. All right, so we'll try to get you out in good order. Am I not on the... All right. Okay. All right, so we'll try to get you out in good order so you can get home and get some rest. Now, we need to start off once again in Exodus chapter 1 and verse 1. It says, "Now these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt." And as I pointed out, the word "now" seems to imply that it's a continuation of what you read in the book of Genesis. And so it lists all the people that came in. And then years passed by, and it says in verse 7, "And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them." So they end up growing to be a little over 1 million strong. I think somebody put it about 2 million strong people. That's a big church to have. I don't think I'd want Moses' job. I heard Dr. Ruckman say one time, he said, you know, if you really want to read the book for pastors, you read about Moses' life. It's called The Church in the Wilderness, you know. And you read Moses' life, and you want to find a guy who had trouble. I mean, he had all sorts of trouble. People murmuring, complaining, wanting to turn back, getting excited. You know, his associate pastor going liberal, all sorts of things. One thing after another, you know. And so now it says, Now there rose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. So he begins to get a little bit concerned because he feels that the children of Israel might outnumber the Egyptians. And then if in battle, all of a sudden the Israelites might turn and help the enemy and turn against the Egyptians. So he was kind of concerned about that. So the way he decided to deal with them was by putting pressure on them and turning them into slaves. So in verse 11 it says, "Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens." Notice the wording, afflict them with their burdens. I imagine that burdens can be afflicting, and we're going to look at this in just a moment. He says in verse 12, "But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew." So it seems like the more pressure that he put on them, they just multiplied and grew. Now this should remind you of something. Hold your place here and go over to Acts chapter 8, Acts 8. Now we got the early church, and if you if you just take a moment and think about where you are, if you're in Acts chapter 8, Acts 7 just happened, which meant Stephen was stoned, and Saul, who ended up getting saved in chapter 9, he's ended up consenting to his death. And in chapter 8 and verse 1 it says, "And Saul," this is the guy who later becomes Paul, "was consenting unto his death." Now the his is Stephen's death. You just read chapter 7. It says, "And at that time there was a great persecution against the church, which was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered abroad throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles." So they get persecuted. This is persecution that was intended to extinguish the church and get rid of the church. However, Jesus Christ said that upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Amen. And the church is still around. It's still around. And so notice what happens in verse 4. "Therefore they that were scattered abroad," if you want to know how they were scattered abroad, read verse 1. It tells you they were scattered abroad because of the persecution. "Therefore they that were scattered abroad went everywhere," doing what? Preaching the word. So the purpose of the persecution was to stop them, and he figured if you kill them, then it stops this Christianity. But all it did was just spread the word everywhere. It's like you try to put out a fire or something, and you throw, something on it, and it just scatters all the embers everywhere, and they start a whole bunch of more fires. And so that's what was going on here. There was an old church father, his name was Tertullian, and what he said is, he said that the blood of martyrs is the seed of the church. The blood of martyrs is the seed of the church. And you look in Exodus, and it says the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. By the way, you know how you're going to grow? The Lord's going to put pressure on you. Did you not realize what we read in John 15? John 15, there's 3 types of fruit bearing, right? In John 15, you've got those that bear fruit, then you got those that bear more fruit, and then you got those that bear much fruit. You know what the Lord does to those that are bearing fruit? He purges them so they can bring forth more fruit. So you know what He'll do to you? He'll come and He'll cut in your life, and cutting brings pain. And sometimes that pain comes into your life and trouble comes into your life because the Lord's trying to get more fruit out of you. And so the best thing to do is just yield to Him and understand that He's got it all under control. I don't understand why the Lord does things. I got to be honest. I have prayed some prayers on some of your behalf. In this room, I have prayed some prayers for some of you, and it did not turn out the way I wanted the prayer to be answered. And then as time went on, I saw that the reason why the Lord didn't answer it my way, and His way was better. By the way, His way is always better. It's always better. All right, so the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And so just remember that in your life, the Lord's going to bring turmoil, and He's going to bring persecution sometimes. I think probably one of the greatest hindrances to the church has been the lack of persecution. We have it so good, we have it so easy, that now just ask Christians to show up on a Wednesday night to go to church is like pulling teeth. And we don't have it bad. We don't have it bad in this country. And so I think that sometimes we have it too easy. And because we have it too easy, our Christianity is not that firm. It's not that strong. And we get miffed about little things. Little things tick people off. They get people upset, right? You've seen it, right? People get upset about the strangest things. Maybe some are for good reason, maybe some are not. But I kind of have to feel that some of the things that people get upset about and leave churches are over very petty things. I didn't like the color of the carpet. I didn't like the way Sister so-and-so didn't say hi to me. All sorts of reasons why people, do that kind of stuff. You don't have enough for the kids. You don't have this. You don't have that, And people get upset about different things. I read a story about some Christians. These Christians were in Romania. They were around the time that the Nazis came in. And when the Nazis came in and began to take over, they had the secret police, and the man who was writing his book said that the Nazis were nothing compared to what was going to happen when they were under communist rule. And the man who wrote the book, his name is Richard Wurmbrand, and he wrote a book called Tortured for Christ. He said that the underground church was a different church than he had ever met before. It was very different. I was telling my wife some of these things. It was a different church. He said, here's what it was. When you and I lead somebody to Christ, many times the person we lead to Christ just becomes part of just a silent group of people that, we just live our lives. We go to church. Yeah, I go to that church, go to that church. How many have ever been witnessing to somebody and they tell you they go to church and you ask them, what church? And they go, it's that church, and they're not certain, right? So he said that the underground church, the real underground church, we're not an underground church. The real underground church that went to lead somebody to Christ was such a big deal that it meant possibly orphaning your own children, or getting yourself thrown into jail just because you led somebody to Jesus Christ. He said there was a Russian soldier. And he was told at the train station to go to Richard Wurmbrand's house because they kind of spread the word that light could be found at his house. So the soldier comes to his house, and he comes to Richard Wurmbrand, and he tells him, he says, I'm here because I understand light can be found here. And he said, yes, come on in. So he took out a Bible and began to witness to him. And right as he began to witness to him, the Russian soldier reached out his hand and he stopped him and he said, sir, please do not mislead me. I want to know the truth. And he said, sir, Richard Wurmbrand looked at him and said, sir, I can assure you that this is the truth. Amen. Later on that evening, that man got saved. Amen. And many of these guys would go, these Russian soldiers would go back, and they would witness at the peril of their own lives. Sometimes the children would take, and what they would do is that the children would be out there and they would go up to the Russian soldiers because the adults, it was very challenging for them, and the kids would walk right up, and the Russian soldiers would they loved the children, and they would hand them little gospel tracts, gospel booklets. They said that what they did is they took Marx and Lenin doctrine, and what they did is they took little booklets. On the front, they put a big old picture of Lenin or a big old picture of Marx. And the first 9 pages were all sorts of quotations from Marx and Lenin. But once you got to page number 10, they put the gospel right in there. And everything that you passed out had to be approved by a censorship board. So he'd have to take it down. They had to have it approved by the censorship board. So when the censor picked up the booklet and he saw Lenin's picture on the front, he was very pleased. And he looked at the first couple of pages, very pleased to see things by Lenin, you know. And so he took his stamp and he approved. He put his stamp of approval on this literature. He said when they got out there and passed out those gospel tracts, everybody was reading. They were taking them, and they wanted to buy them as fast as they could because they saw it was Marxist doctrine and Lenin doctrine. He says that by the time they got to page 10 and realized what was actually going on, they were long gone. I'll tell you what, some of these folks you see, and I'm reading about them, and when they went through some affliction, man, you could see how they grew and multiplied. Now, the thing that bothers me is I got to stand up there at the same judgment seat of Christ. They got to stand up there and give an account for myself. And so what are we doing with the freedom that God has given us here? What are we doing? All right, the more they afflicted and the more they multiplied and grew. I'm back over in Exodus. And it says, and they were grieved, verse 12, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel, verse 13, and the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. Now watch what they do, and they made their lives bitter. Bitter. How did they make their lives bitter? With hard bondage. They made their lives bitter with hard bondage. That reminded me of a verse. I've shown some of you this. If you want to know how to pray, you want to know how to pray for somebody? Go over to Hebrews 13. Hebrews 13. Put yourself in their position. That's a good way to pray for somebody. Hebrews 13. Made their lives bitter with hard bondage. Bondage can make you bitter. Bondage can wear on you. Hebrews 13 and verse 3. Remember them that are in bonds, as bound with them, and them which suffer adversity, as being yourselves also in the body. Now the bond, right off the bat, off the surface, is somebody being in jail. And sometimes people forget to pray for people in jail. But when you pray for them as if you were locked up with them. Remember them that are in bonds as bound with them. See that? That's how it says. So when you get down on your knees and pray, and you're praying for somebody, if you want to take your prayer life to the next level, if you want to take it to the next level, don't just say, Lord, I pray for so-and-so. Try to take a step back and think about how you would want somebody to pray for you if you were in that situation. Notice the rest of the verse, and them which suffer adversity as being yourselves also in the body. If you want to take your prayer life to the next level and you're praying for somebody who has some type of health issue, imagine you have the same kind of health issue. Somebody's got cancer. Imagine what that does to the family. Yeah. All the doctor's visits, and how about the unknown? Yeah. How many of you have ever waited for a result from a doctor? That will tear you up almost more than knowing what the result is. Yeah. Because it's like that waiting process, and you're like, oh, I'm not exactly sure. How about hospital bills? Yeah. These are things you can put yourself in someone's shoes. Bondage. He made their life bitter with hard bondage. I got thinking about this bondage. Go over to 1 Samuel 22. 1 Samuel 22. There's a lot of men that came to David. And here's some things it said about him. I call this the 3D outfit. 1 Samuel 22 and verse 2. 1 Samuel 22, 2. And everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented gathered themselves unto him, that's David, verse 1. And he became a captain over them, and there were with him about 400 men. These things will cause you bondage. Distress will cause someone bondage. You see it on people's faces, that they get in a lot of distress, You take all this stuff with the health of the world and the COVID and the vaccines, and should I get a vaccine or shouldn't I get a vaccine, and the finances and all that stuff causes people to stress out. Distress. And what is it? That can be a bondage. That can be a bondage. If you're not careful, that thing could be a bondage. Watch what you... Can I just give you a hint? Quit spending so much time with the news media. Quit spending so much time with the news media, because the news media is just pretty much pumping you full of fear. That's what it is. All right, they were in distress. They were discontented. Boy, you know a lot of people that are discontented today. Some people can get like that. They can get to where they're not happy about anything. Nothing pleases them. They're not happy. They're not happy with their job. They're not happy with their wife. They're not happy with themselves. They're not happy with anything. They're just discontented. That can be a bondage. They're discontented. You know what else can be a bondage? Debt can be a bondage. That can be a bondage. Take your Bible and look over at Proverbs 22. Proverbs 22. Now, I'm just touching on a few things that can be bondage here tonight. Maybe your life is made bitter because of it. And then at the end of this point, I'll tell you the answer. Proverbs 22. Proverbs 22. And verse 7. He says, the rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. How many know how many of you have felt that before? You know, debt can be, if it's, the Bible's true, in servitude is bondage, and debt can be bondage. And you feel it. You feel the pressure. It's there. How about this? Go over to 1 Corinthians 7. 1 Corinthians 7. Here's an interesting one. 1 Corinthians 7. First Corinthians 7 and verse 27. Art thou bound unto a wife? Seek not to be loosed. Art thou loosed from a wife? Seek not a wife. You know, some marriages can feel like bondage. They really can. They can feel that way. And I pray yours is not like that, and I pray the Lord helps you. And it takes both parties, right? It takes both parties in the marriage. But some marriages can be like that. Some people wish they could get a divorce, but can't. Marriage can be that way. These are things that can be bondage, and it can make your life bitter if you're not careful. Here's another one. Go over to Luke 13. Luke 13. These are real issues that people deal with. Luke 13. How about disease? Luke 13 and verse 11. And now in this particular case, this woman had a spirit of infirmity. Notice verse 11, it says, and behold, there was a woman which had a spirit of infirmity 18 years, and was bound together, and could in no wise lift up herself. Now this woman, the devil has to do with her infirmity. Not all disease has to do with the devil. So just because somebody has a disease or an ailment doesn't mean it's from the devil. But notice what it says, what Jesus says in verse 16. And ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan hath bound these 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath day? Now, I'm not saying all disease is from the devil. I'm not saying that at all. Maybe some of it is, and maybe the Lord allows that kind of thing, and obviously He does. But you know what? Disease can be bondage. It can be bondage for some people, and it can really bother them and really wear on them and hurt them. It can be a bondage. How about this one? John 11. John 11. How about death? John 11. And not yours, how about somebody else's that you can't get over? And it can take somebody into bondage and into despair and make their lives bitter. Notice John 11 in verse 44, Lazarus, this is Lazarus, and he that was dead came forth bound, hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound with a napkin. Jesus saith to him, loose him and let him go. All right, so this guy, this is Lazarus, and he's bound. That's how they wound him up. They bound him up with all these grave clothes, like a mummy, you know. And that's when they put him in the ground. You know, death can be like that for some people, and it makes them bitter. The Lord kills somebody or allows someone to die or takes someone who you think the Lord took them before He should have taken them. And it makes you bitter. It makes you bitter, and that can be a bondage on the heart, and it can really take you down. How about this? How about this? Dealing with the past. Dealing with the past. Go to look at Mark 5. Now, take these next three and write these verses down so you can study them later. Mark 5. Mark 5 and verse 41. Mark 5:41. Dealing with the past. Mark 5:41. It says, now this is a girl who's dead. a little girl who's dead. She's 12 years old in verse 42. When Jesus came to heal a girl, he told him not to make, in verse 39, he says, "Why make ye this ado and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleepeth." This is where they laughed Jesus Christ to scorn. In verse 41, it says, "And he took the damsel by the hand and said unto her," and I'm probably going to butcher this, but Talitha Kumi, or Talitha Kumai, which is being interpreted, "Damsel, I say unto thee, arise." Now watch what happens to this 12-year-old girl. "And straightway the damsel arose and walked." Now notice the phrasing. She arose and walked, for she was of the age of 12 years. So it's a 12-year-old girl. Now go over to, I'm going to comment all these at the same time. Go over to Matthew 11. Luke 7. Luke 7. Luke 7. Luke 7 and verse 14. Luke 7 and verse 14. So this is the widow of Nain, and they're carrying, this is the funeral procession. And it says that he stops the procession, and it says in verse 14, "And he, Jesus, came and touched the bier." That's the coffin where the young man was. "And they that bare him stood still, and he said, Young man, I say unto thee, arise." Now it's a young man. A young man. This is different from a child. Write down 1 John chapter 2 and verse 15 to make your cross-reference there. So young man implies he's a little bit older. He's older than a 12-year-old. He's a young man. And he says in verse 15, "And he that was dead," notice his reaction, "he that was dead sat up and began to speak." Now in our other text, the 12-year-old girl, she arose and walked, right? And here, he sat up and he sat up and began to speak. All right, now go back to John 11. You were there just a moment ago. John 11. Now, I don't know the age. I don't know the age here of Lazarus. But every time I've read this passage, I've always felt that Lazarus was maybe a middle-aged man. He wasn't a kid, is kind of what I get when I read this passage. They seem to have their house. It seems like the brothers and sisters are adults, and they're kind of taking care of things. When he gets risen from the dead, notice what it says in verse 43. "And when he, Jesus, thus had spoken, he, Jesus, cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth." It's always interested, folks, that he said, Lazarus, come forth, instead of just come forth. Some people say, why? Because if he had just said, come forth, the whole mountain would have erupted with dead bodies. So he says, Lazarus, come forth. So he's making sure that they know. "And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. And Jesus saith unto them, Loose him, and let him go." So now I don't know how he did that. I don't know if he came out like and he was hopping, like this, because he said bound hand and foot with grave clothes, right? And he's got his face covered because he's got the napkin on his face. So I don't know if he came jumping out or like a UFO, ooh, is levitating across. I don't know how he came out, but I know this. The 12-year-old girl, when she was risen from the dead, she rose up and walked right away. The young man, when he was raised from the dead, he sat up. He didn't walk. He sat up and spake. And then this last guy, Lazarus, comes forth, and he's bound hand and foot with grave clothes. In the Bible, when the Lord raises the dead, it's a picture of salvation. The Bible says before you got saved, you were dead in trespasses and sins. And if you got saved young, thank the Lord for it. Because you start to notice that the older you wait till you get saved, the more hang-ups you have to get over. But notice who can loose you, and it's Jesus Christ. He's the one that can loose you. So many times that past, dealing with the past, can be a bondage, and it can start to make you bitter. So now, all those things, they're real for different people, and they're real on different levels. And maybe there are other things that I didn't touch tonight. But what's the answer? And there's only one answer, and it's Jesus Christ. So write these verses down. Psalm 55. Psalm 55. Let's go there. Psalm 55. Bondage, bondage. He put burdens on them. Psalm 55. And notice verse 22. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. I can't explain this to you, but when you get down on your knees, you get down on your knees and spend time alone with the Holy God and say, God, here is my burden. Will you please take it? Will you please sustain me? Will you please help me? And you stay on your knees and don't get up until you get help. I don't know how to explain it, but when you get up, the problem is still there, but man, you sure do feel a whole lot lighter.
Amen.
Why? Go to Matthew 11. I like how I said that. Matthew. Matthew 11. Matthew 11. And verse 28, Matthew 11, 28. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Folks, I can't give you rest. I'm not the author of that statement. Jesus Christ can give you rest. Watch what he says. Take my yoke upon you. You know what a yoke is, right? Like the oxen have a yoke. We're city slickers, so we have to have this stuff explained to us. The oxen have a yoke and they team them up together. So the idea is you get in the yoke, well then who else is in the yoke with you? Jesus Christ. And he's pulling along with you. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me. So learn of Jesus Christ. For I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Boy, ain't that something? When you get around Jesus, you find he's easy. His yoke is easy, and his burden is light. I tell you what, I'd much rather go through this life with Jesus than without him. Look over at 1 Peter 5. 1 Peter 5. These are really important verses. You may already know them, but if you didn't know where they were, here's where they are. 1 Peter 5 and verse 7. Casting all your care upon him. And I'm glad the verse doesn't stop there. For he careth for you. Do you realize the implication of and the weight of those words? The God of the universe cares about you. I have one of my favorite stories that I love to tell the kids. And so I'll tell you adults. So there's this little monkey. Little monkey's walking through the jungle, and he's got a big old bag on his back, and he's carrying this really heavy burden. And about that time, Mr. Elephant comes walking along, and he sees Mr. Monkey carrying this big old burden. And he says, why, Mr. Monkey, that's a really big burden you got there. And Mr. Monkey says, yes, this is a very heavy burden. I'm not sure if I can carry it. And Mr. Elephant says, well, Mr. Monkey, I tell you what, why don't you let me carry you on my back? And Mr. Monkey says, oh, that's so wonderful. This burden is so heavy and my feet are so tired. I sure would love to have you carry this burden on your back. And so Mr. Elephant reaches down with his trunk and he grabs Mr. Monkey and he puts him up on his back. And Mr. Elephant, he's walking through the jungle. And about that time, Mr. Monkey says, oh, Mr. Elephant, this burden is still really heavy. About that time, Mr. Elephant looks up like that, and he sees Mr. Monkey. And there's Mr. Monkey, and he's sitting on Mr. Elephant's back. But he's still got the burden up on his shoulder, and he's trying to hold on to it. And Mr. Elephant said, why, Mr. Monkey? He says, my shoulders are big enough for you and your burden. I feel like Mr. Monkey. You know who Mr. Elephant is supposed to represent? It's supposed to represent the Lord. And the fact of the matter is the Lord's big enough for you and for your burden. And so quit trying to carry that burden. Take that burden and cast it on the Lord. I mean, this world is so full of fear. And this news media has them in bondage. It has them in bondage to fear. It has them in bondage in debt. It has them in bondage to divorce, disease, death, dealing with the past, all these things. So take all those burdens, whatever they are, and take it to the Lord and leave it there. And if you feel that burden, get up and try to follow with you. Just go back again and leave it there again. And if it comes after you again, keep leaving it there. I mean, the throne room is never too busy. Just keep going back and leaving it there. All right, we'll go ahead and get ready to wind this thing up. So what happens is, if you're back in Exodus, he's really hard on him, really hard on him. This new king who forgot everything that Joseph had done, and that's the way people are. Sometimes they forget. They'll forget what you do. They will. They'll forget what you do. You'll forget what they do. But Jesus never forgets. All right, so if you've done something good, don't worry about it if people don't pat you on the back. The Lord He'll pat you on the back when you get home to glory, and that's a good pat on the back. Now, he goes ahead and he hates these Israelites so much, he figures that the only way to get rid of them is just to kill them when they're babies. So he tells these two midwives, and their names are Sifra and Pua, in verse 15. Have no idea if I'm pronouncing them right, but that's how I'm pronouncing them tonight. And so these two Hebrew midwives, he tells them, he says, listen, whenever a baby girl is born, you can save her alive. But if a baby boy is born, you got to take him down to the river, and you need to throw him into the river and drown him. And so the problem is these women, notice in verse 17, but the midwives feared God and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. So they wouldn't obey. And so the king of Egypt, after a while, brought in these midwives and says, what are you doing? And so notice what they say in verse 19. And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively and are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. Now the thing is I read the previous verses, and it says that in verse 17, these midwives feared the Lord, and they did not as the king of Egypt commanded them. So then it appears that they lied to the king in verse 19. That's what it appears. They lied to him. But the Lord blessed them for it anyway. Now, I'm not telling you to use this verse to justify your lying. But the only thing I can think of is this is where you have a real life scenario where we ought to obey God rather than man. And God's law supersedes man's law, and rather than committing murder, they said, no, we're not going to do that, and they ended up lying about it. Same thing, you notice Rahab does the same thing with the two fellas that come up on the roof, and she lies about them, and she hides them, and the Lord honored that, and the Lord blessed her. And those are exceptions that the Lord did, and if you look into them more closely, you'll find that they ended up obeying the Lord rather than man. And so there's no justification there for lying. So verse 22, we'll wrap it up, and then we'll go. And I see opening the doors has made some of you cold, so I forgot to keep that in mind, so I apologize. So if you could at least close that back door in this door. So verse 22 says, and Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. So that's how what is his command, but the command was not obeyed. And so now we're going to find out, and we pick it up next time. We'll talk a little bit about Moses and about his upbringing and how the Lord spared this young man's life and how he ends up getting used mightily for the Lord. Father, I thank you for the shed blood of Jesus Christ. I thank you for those who have come out to the church service here tonight. I pray, Lord, that you would help them as they get ready to go their ways. Please fill them with the Spirit of God. Meet their need. Lord, I don't know what the burdens are here tonight. I don't know if anybody if anything even touched the heart of anybody tonight and the things we were talking about. But Lord, if it did, I pray that wherever they are in their lives spiritually, that you'd help them and that they'd take that burden, they'd cast it on you, whatever it is, and that you would sustain them like your word says it will. Father, we love you. We trust these things in your hands, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's sing that song, Take Your Burden to the Lord and Leave It There. Do you guys know what that page number is? Take your burden to the Lord and leave it there. Leave it there. That should be it. 353. 353 in the red book.